Okay, welcome to video 4. This is the last of the videos when we're looking at the type of cost. And we're looking now at the economies of scale. And we've been thinking of the short run for businesses, our production decisions, and increasing the variable inputs. We're now actually going to be looking at in the long run, and here all the inputs are variable, and we have the time to build new factories, to buy more land, to purchase new, better, more machines, and there's a greater scope to make changes in the long run than there is in the short run. The changes will take longer, but equally they take longer to reverse. So if we mess something up, it will take an awful lot longer to correct it. So on the short run, if you mess something up like shifts patterns or numbers of staff, we can actually change this relatively quickly. It may take a few weeks, but we can do it relatively easily. But if we build our factory and then decide it's in the wrong place, or perhaps we shouldn't have actually made the investment at all, it's going to be with us for a very long time. If we consider the two pictures here, and the picture on the left hand side shows one person making or repairing shoes by hand, and the picture on the right hand side is something which is totally different. It's a factory, it's mechanised, it has lots of people, and it produces lots of shoes. So as you can guess, the picture on the right hand side will actually make an awful lot more shoes than the one on the left. So if the cost per unit of output, the average cost, falls as the output rises, then a firm experiences economies of scale, and each item has a lower unit cost, which is therefore of greater benefit to the business. They can be sold more cheaply or for a lower price and make a higher profit, and therefore it's in the firm's interest to achieve economies of scale if and when they can. If we consider the reasons for the economies of scale, we've got this lovely picture here of ants. Now ants are really specialised creatures. They live in colonies. Where they're specialised is they all tend to have one job to do each in the colony. They don't do lots of jobs. Each ant has one specific job. And actually that really fits in well with these economies of scale, because actually you have more specialism and division of labour, and larger firms can do this by dividing the labour tasks, dividing them out separately into the different types of jobs, and it's much more efficient to separate these tasks into discrete jobs. So for example, putting heels on shoes is one person's job, stitching uppers to shoes is another person's job. Now the training costs are lower, because people are trained for one task and they do not need to be trained for 5 or 6 jobs, so they learn the job better, there's a reduced time for switching tasks, and they make a lot fewer mistakes. So in a small firm, one person actually might do the designing, the invoicing, the website, running part of the company finance, but as it grows it could employ marketing people, sales people, HR people, specialists who are really trained up. This opportunity to specialise is important, and one reason why we actually see economies of scale. If we think about economies of scale, we think about indivisibilities. Now we've got the picture here on the bottom of this shoemaking machine. Now there's a minimum size for particular inputs, for example the machine to produce these soles. Now there's no sense in having a large machine at a plant unless you actually have a minimum number of products to actually produce. So a firm needs to have a certain production level for it to be able to make use of that input, and it only becomes economical if you can actually make a reasonable amount of shoes. So as the company grows, you get to a time when you actually need these for specialist jobs, but you really have to be certain of the amount you actually need to make to ensure that actually it's going to be economical for you. So larger operations are better able to make use of these inputs. They can do more, they're more efficient, and there's perhaps a smaller downtime on machinery. And there's the opportunity to plan for the latest equipment as more labour saving equipment is actually produced. If we think about the plant related issues, so for example we may think about large containers are relatively cheaper than small ones. So it may well be worth getting a 3,000 litre tank rather than a 1,000 litre tank, because it holds 3 times the quantity, and this could be more efficient for a larger company. So bigger machines are more efficient than smaller ones. We could be thinking about the multi-stage production, i.e. one shoe goes through several processes on different machines. One with sides, one could be uppers, and then fit together. If we think about Bosch, and Bosch, as you know, make lawnmowers. They've got a factory quite near to us in Stowmarket, and they may have one part of the factory making electric motors, and these then go to a different part of the factory where they can be fitted into any number of different appliances. Now, it can only work this way because of the size of production, so that's multi-stage production. And then we think about the byproducts, which either can be used as part of the business or sold. So malted barley from a brewery may actually be a byproduct which could be sold for something like animal products, animal foods. If we think about the organisational aspects, the rationalisation of functions into discrete departments, you can actually then specialise and work so much more efficiently. The spreading the overhead cost of expensive work, research and development, and we've discussed in monopolies, this is expensive, but it can actually be spread across the whole organisation to make it cheaper and to make more savings. Finance is cheaper. It's cheaper to get loans in markets if you want a large market with big assets to finance you. Equally proportionate, there's going to be higher costs for small businesses. And there's economies of scope, and the large company may be able to change direction much easier than a small one. We're talking about economies of scale, but equally we need to talk about diseconomies of scale, because actually it may actually be a diseconomy of scale, and not always cheaper for a small business than for a larger business. And we think about the level of the organisation, they're so different. So as a business grows, some pressure might actually force its costs to increase. And there could actually be difficulties in coordinating work, and if we look at the picture and we have all those people being coordinated, they step in time, it's difficult and it requires lots of hard work and lots of effort. Now for a large company the coordination costs can be much higher than for a small organisation who may have people on site who all know each other and work well together. We have this issue of motivation which we've discussed previously, and workers may feel distanced, they may feel they've got no say, and it's harder to organise employee engagement. As you get larger, we think about the more complicated industrial relations, and we think about unions, and they may be involved in discussions on pay settlements, which may take much longer to organise with much higher costs. And there's these interdependencies between the processes, and they become harder to manage. So we're trying to manage manufacture on different sites, and may have people specifically to manage businesses. So there are economies of scale, but there are larger costs with these, and we do see these costs start to rise. If we're to consider the long run, the average costs, in the long run there's no fixed costs. So the assumptions are that a business starts to expand, the average costs decrease with economies of scale. And we see the economies of scale, for example, the cost per unit of production starts to fall. And then we get this period of the constant average costs, where we see no additional costs. And then finally, as a business continues to expand, past the average costs begin to rise, and then we actually start seeing these diseconomies of scale. And we have it here on this long run average costs curve. And we can see it's a simplified long run average cost for a company, and it's similar to the marginal cost curve. If we think of the first area, the economies of scale, we see the average cost falling as the output grows, and then we have this constant costs where there's no real change. And then we have this diseconomies of scale, this period where the costs are increasing and we actually get this diseconomy of scale. And I think it's fair to say that for large companies this is much more complicated. Whereas one area may go through diseconomies of scale, as the business actually has the opportunity to increase further, with other opportunities to cut the costs down.